to the Travel Squad podcast.
We adventure the world together, one passport stamp at a time.
We're here to share travel news, tips, and our own adventures with you.
Every Travel Tuesday, we share stories on a variety of topics, including our hometown San Diego, hiking,
weekenders, national parks, international getaways,
and inspiring you to go on your own adventures, even if it starts with your own backyard. I'm Jamal.
Brittany.
And I'm Kim.
And we're the Travel Squad podcast.
So grab your ticket and your passport.
And don't forget your travel insurance.
And prepare for takeoff.
Hey, Squaddies!
Welcome to this week's episode of the Travel Squad podcast. Today we have a very special guest joining us today, Gavin McFall, who is a fellow Squadie, OG Squadie from the very, very beginning when we started this podcast.
And in this episode, we're going to talk with Gavin about his 14-month-long backpacking trip. He traveled all around the world and he visited 19 different countries. He even obtained a work visa and he worked 2 different jobs in Australia during this trip.
I loved this interview with Gavin. He was so easy to talk to. It was so fascinating to hear about his trip. And I always think that these extreme long trips are really fascinating. I'm so interested in how people make them work. And Gavin really gave us all the details. He shares how he saved, how he worked, how he sold his belongings to afford the trip, how he planned, how he made friends along the way. There's a ton of inspiration and a ton of good tips in this episode. He even shared some of his experiences with guided tours, which you know we love, which I thought was such a genius way to kind of lighten the brunt of a long solo trip. So if you're thinking about taking a round-the-world trip like this, then get your notepad out because this one's going to inspire you. I know it did me. I want to book my round-the-world trip now.
And with that, let's welcome Gavin to the Travel Squad podcast.
Hello, Gavin, and welcome to the Travel Squad podcast. We are so excited to have you on the show. We've been going back and forth a bunch on Instagram DMs, and we've been following your trips, and we're so excited to have you on. Thanks for joining us today.
Absolutely. It's an honor.
Oh, I love that. So we've been following your trips. You have been very busy and going all over the world, and we're so excited to dive into it. But we like to start every episode with a guest on going way, way back to one of your first travel memories that sticks out.
Yeah, so I've been traveling basically my entire life. My grandparents own a cottage up in Ontario, Canada, and I grew up in West Virginia. My parents are from New York, so we would always just do a road trip up. We would stop in Ithaca overnight and then just drive up into Canada the next day. So I always just remember since I was a little kid sitting in the back seat, my parents' rule was always don't talk to the immigration officer unless they ask you a question directly. So that's just something I've always grown up doing. And then when I was in middle school, my brother went on a band trip to Europe for 2 weeks during the summer. And I was so jealous. And after that, I had to convince my parents to send me on a school trip. And I did. I made the PowerPoint presentations. I had the poster boards. I worked them over. And they eventually relented. They sent me to Costa Rica when I was in the 8th grade for a week with the school. And it was just an eye-opening experience. And since then, travel's been something that I've made a priority in my life. I studied abroad when I was in college, and then I planned to do this whole trip around the world in 2020. Obviously, that did not happen. So then it just kept getting pushed back, and it grew and more, and then I just set sail.
So what was your motivation to take a trip? And for our listeners, Gavin, you took a 14-and-a-half-month long journey around the world, hitting 19 different countries.
Yeah.
What was your motivation behind even taking a trip of this length?
So it originally started with me and a few friends in college. We planned on doing an Australian work and holiday visa, which is a visa that Americans can get, and they can go live and work in Australia full-time for a year. And if you do a certain amount of days in Australia working, you can have a second year put on if you did certain jobs. So it originally started as my friends and I were going to move to Australia for a year. We were going to go live in the outback. We were going to have a great time. And then just the course of life, my friends had to back out of the trips for one reason or another. And I said, well, I'm still going to go. That's not going to stop me. And during the pandemic, I really explored the travel side of YouTube and Netflix and podcasts. That was something that helped me cope with the pandemic and isolation. And that's how I found the Travel Squad podcast. And that's how I listen to you guys a lot. But those other videos that I also saw people, they were doing 6-month trips in Southeast Asia or 4 months in Central America. And I said, well, Australia's right there. I might as well go do it. So a lot of that motivation, inspiration was seeing other people do it and saying, hey, it's possible. And then me also saying, well, I've already committed. I've told all my friends I'm going to do this trip. I'm not going to back out. So I have to do it. And also for myself, since I've been a kid, The Amazing Race has been my favorite TV show. I dream about competing on it on a daily basis. So that I got to go and see places that I've watched on TV growing up that I've had this desire to go to. And now I had the chance and I took it.
Well, let me tell you something real quick, Gavin. You really melted my heart in some sort of way when you said The Amazing Race, because I love The Amazing Race. Also, I want to compete on The Amazing Race. I've talked about applying with Brittany. We haven't yet, not for any particular reason, but she doesn't seem to necessarily be too gung-ho on it. So I'm seeing a potential teammate applicant right here.
You have my Instagram.
All right. Perfect. But what you were saying about Australia and that work holiday visa, it brings a lot of questions to mind. One, was that the first place that you went starting your travel journey for that duration of time, or was that just one of the places? And how easy is it to get that type of visa? Obviously, I'm sure coming from other countries in the world, it may be a little bit more difficult, but as an American, was it very easy to get? And what type of hoops did you have to go through to get that?
Yeah, so I actually started my trip around the world in Mexico. When I had started my trip, the Australian borders hadn't opened yet. So I was still having to deal with wearing the mask, COVID tests, and everything. So I started in Mexico and did 3 months going down to Panama. And by the time that I got to Panama, the Australian borders had opened and I had already gotten my visa at that point. And it's actually pretty easy to get the visa as an American. You just have to hit a certain amount of requirements. The number one requirement is that you are 30 years of age or younger when you enter Australia. So they want young people, they want backpackers, people that aren't going to go and establish a life down there. And then I also had to show them that I graduated from university. I had to have a degree. And in addition to that, I also had to upload a screenshot of my bank statement, just saying that I had at least 5,000 Australian dollars in my account. So they knew that I would be showing up with a little bit of money. Then I just sent that to the Australian government and they emailed me back about 3 weeks later with my approval letter. Some people I've seen on Facebook get approved literally within seconds. They'll hit the submit button and then 30 seconds later, they'll get the email saying it's gotten approved. And some people, it takes months. So it's kind of just a hit or miss. For Americans, it's pretty easy. There's not a cap on it. But I know some countries, they only let 600 or 700 people apply. But a lot of people that go for this visa are primarily Europeans, specifically UK residents. But there were also lots of other Dutchies, Germans, met some Italians while I was traveling. It was a really international scene of backpackers staying in hostels.
I have 2 questions for you. How long between graduating and taking this trip did you have?
So I had 1 year. I graduated December of 2020, and I left for my trip December of 2021. So I waited until after Christmas. That was my one promise to my mom. And I had worked full time for a year saving up for this trip. I lived at home because of the pandemic. I was doing my student teaching at first. And my university said, we don't want you working any other jobs. You should just be doing your student teaching. So that's why I lived at home. And my parents knew I was saving up for this trip, so they weren't charging me rent or anything. So I was able to save up all my money for a full year. And then I sold my car, and that's how I set off on my jet. And when I was in Australia, what's really nice about the working holiday visa is the minimum wage is about 25, 26 Australian dollars an hour, which comes out to about 16, 17 US an hour. So the minimum wage, even for just being a waitress or a bartender, is a lot higher. So you can save and travel around Australia on that money that you earn as you're traveling.
That's amazing. And that was actually my second question is what was the job that you did when I was in Australia?
So I worked 2 different jobs. My first job, I was working in a hotel/hostel in Cairns up in North Queensland by the Great Barrier Reef. I was doing work for accommodation. So I would just go clean the bathrooms, change the beds, your typical hotel cleaner stuff. And so I was able to do that for a month. And then later on, I actually got a job doing ski rental. I was shocked that Australia actually even had ski resorts, but they do down in Victoria. So I was able to work there for 2 months. I was working 60-hour weeks, and I saved up just over 11,000 Australian dollars in just under 2 months.
Wow. And then those were the only 2 jobs you had while you were in Australia?
Those were the only 2, and unfortunately, the ski job that I was doing did not qualify me to renew my visa for my second year. And at that point, I already had part of my trip to Southeast Asia booked because I was going to go to Southeast Asia for a few months and then come back to Australia. But basically, the way that it worked out is I would have had to have canceled my entire Southeast Asia trip just to get work done to do the second year. So I just called it quits. So that's when I ended up doing Southeast Asia for 4 months before I headed over to the Middle East and then Europe and then back to the States.
So you made a really good point on there's only certain jobs that are accepted on this work holiday visa. What are some of those jobs that qualify for the work holiday visa?
So for Americans, if you are north of the Tropic of Capricorn or Cancer, whichever the tropic is that goes through Australia, if you are north of that, any job within hospitality counts. And then if you are in rural Australia or very rural Australia doing things like agriculture, so picking fruit is a very popular backpacker job. Cattle farming, they need a lot of ranch hands out in the outback. And then you can also do construction, lighting technician, some of those really more hard to find in demand jobs that are like we kind of just crank people through a little bit faster. Those are the jobs that renew for that second year of that visa. But if you're south of that tropic, it's only in the rural and very rural Australia. So the reason that mine didn't count is because my specific town postcode that I was in wasn't rural enough, but all the postcodes surrounding me were. So that it was just a little technicality on the website, which was what caused me to not renew it.
I mean, I guess you were in the big city where you were working, even though it's technically kind of rural. It was the big boy in town, so it doesn't count then, I guess, huh?
A whole whopping 700 people.
Well, compared to the outskirts, I have to imagine that is a lot of people.
That is true. Out in the outback, it's like you just drive for hours and you don't pass anyone.
Oh, gosh. Well, let me ask you this. Looking back, do you feel like it was meant to be that way so you can continue your trip, or do you have any regrets about not being able to stay?
I think that the universe aligned in a way that I benefited from not being there for another year. If I was there for another year, who knows? The universe could have put me on different paths. But when you're backpacking, the people that you meet and when you're staying in hostels, you really form a unique connection because you're in a very unique situation together. You take a bunch of 20 Western people and they're all drunk and you plop them somewhere in the middle of Southeast Asia. It's going to be an interesting experiment regardless. So the people that I met when I was backpacking through like Vietnam and Thailand and Cambodia were some of the most amazing people that I ever got to meet. And I'm still friends with them. We still have group chats. I just messaged them happy 4th of July. We won 1776. And all the Brits were like, yeah, whatever. We have health insurance. You just make those connections. So I don't like to think of it of what could have been versus what was, and more of just appreciative of the experience that I did get to have. That was something that I reminded myself a lot on my trip, is how fortunate and privileged I was to be in the position that I was. Because I know that not everyone can go do a 14-month trip around the world. I had to sit down and recognize that made every connection, every sunset, every rooftop bar that I went to that much more special.
Rooftop bars, yes, representing.
So many. I loved them.
Yeah, I really love what you said about that because, I mean, as one door closes, so many other opportunities open, and it like just your mindset on, I'm just going to take it day by day and see how things go, I think is a really great mindset to have. Hey, Squaddies, we want to share one of our favorite travel products with you. Liquid IV is a category-winning hydration brand fueling your well-being while traveling.
One stick fits into 16 ounces of water to give you 3 times the electrolytes of traditional sports drinks and hydrates you 2 times faster than water alone. Their half-ounce hydration multiplier powder packet is the one product you need in every suitcase, carry-on, and day pack.
We use it while flying on planes because flights can be so dehydrating. We use it when we feel jet lagged, when we're out on a hike, and after a long night out that has us feeling worn out. In just one stick, you get 5 essential vitamins, B3, B5, B6, B12, and vitamin C.
Liquid IV also now comes in 12 delicious and refreshing flavors to keep your hydration routine exciting. Our favorites are the lemon lime and tangerine with immune support.
It's made with premium ingredients, all non-GMO and gluten, dairy, and soy-free. Get 20% off when you go to liquidiv.com and use Travel Squad Podcast at checkout. That's 20% off anything you order when you shop Better Hydration today using promo code Travel Squad Podcast at liquidiv.com.
Hey, Squaddies, let's take a quick detour to talk about our travel itineraries that we've created just for you.
We just launched several new international trip itineraries, including Tulum and Japan. This is on top of the itineraries we already have for U.S. trips like the Hawaiian island of Kauai, the U.S. Virgin Islands, as well as national park trip itineraries, including Utah's Mighty 5 national parks and a week at Grand Teton and Yellowstone.
These fully built out 20 to 30 page PDF guides are available for instant download on our site right now. Every detail of the trip is laid out for you, so all you have to do is download, book, show up, and have fun.
The itineraries tell you where to fly into, the exact route to take, where to stay, park entrance prices, where to eat, driving distance between attractions, the things to see and do, even the hikes we recommend, their mileage, and the time to allot for each one. And believe it or not, so much more.
Be sure to head over to TravelSquadPodcast.com to download your very own comprehensive travel itinerary today.
But let's go back to the start of your trip. So you went to Mexico and you were doing 3 months in Central America and you made it down to Panama. Tell us a little bit about that first part of your adventure. Did you do that completely on your own? How did you plan that? I mean, you had 14 months kind of planned out in advance. So how much planning did you do each step of the way?
So I liked to plan it chunk by chunk. So starting with that Central America, I knew I'd be there for 3 months. And I had done lots of research on different itineraries, the different highlights to see. Nomadic Matt's website, brokebackpacker.com, listening to other podcasts. So I kind of like Frankenstein stitched together what I knew I wanted to see. I knew I was starting my trip in Mexico City for New Year's because I have a friend who lives in Mexico City. So I knew I was going to be starting my trip with him. And we actually had another friend come down and we started as the 3 of us. We did New Year's Eve and then we went up after New Year's into rural central Mexico, up into the high mountains to a small town called Real de Catorce. Now I'm from Colorado, but that elevation was rough. And it was some of the most stunning sights, but we did a Jeep tour where we went down into the desert. But going down, it's like a 45-degree angle. We were sitting on top of a Jeep. And it was just rock cliff to one side, cliff face on the other. So we did that and went back down to Mexico. And then I knew I was going to fly over to the Yucatan and do Merida and some other parts. And while I was there, I ran into another backpacker who said, don't go to Isla Holbox. It's rained out right now. Go to Bacalar. So I said, I'll go if you go. So she said, sure. And we went to Bacalar together. And that was how a lot of my trips kind of were. I never traveled with people except for small instances like that where we would say, oh, we're going to the same place at the same time. Let's go together. Safety in numbers. That's a really big backpacker community thing. Stick together. And because so many places and hostels are so social, you find the same people that you run into over and over again. So I was in Belize and I met this guy at a hostel and he's like, oh, I'm going to Guatemala tomorrow. I said, oh, I'll be there next week. It was nice to meet you, whatever. Next hostel I show up at, who's sleeping in the bed beneath me but this guy? So then we hung out for a little bit and he's like, I'm catching a bus to whatever city. So I thought that was it. And then a week later, we run into each other in the same hostel again. So we just kind of did this thing, and he eventually said, just come with me to the Pacific coast and learn how to surf for a few days. And I said, sure, why not? So I went to the Pacific coast with him, and then after that, I actually had booked onto a group tour with a company called G Adventures. They're very similar to Gate 1, but they have hundreds of tours around the world, and they're people from all over the world. And they also are meant for more adventurous kind of small group tours. So the tour that I did with them, we did 17 days, and we did Honduras, El Salvador, and we were supposed to do Nicaragua, but because of the Omicron variant, they just flew us to Costa Rica, and we had some days there instead. So I did 17 days with them before I went off to Panama after that. I also did a few of these trips, group tours in between, because it's also a great way to meet people.
Mm-hmm.
So that's when I would travel with people. And then if I would meet people along the way that we were going the same direction, we'd get a taxi or a bus together. But for the most part, it was solo. Really, really plugged into those headphones a lot.
Well, I really loved a couple things about what you just said. One of them was, of course, you're doing things on your own, but patching it in between with a guided tour along the way, right? And for multiple purposes, like you mentioned, just to see a little bit more safety in numbers, even though in a guided tour, and of course, meeting people. Unfortunately, we have not done the backpacking route in all the travels we have done, and that's kind of like one of my biggest regrets. So anytime we have somebody like you on, or we're talking to anybody, I'm really envious about it. But you just mentioned how you started traveling with people because you kept seeing them, etc. And that's one thing that people just don't really realize when you travel. Like, even though we haven't done the group or the backpacking thing, we've met so many people in our travels that we'll start traveling with independently, like once we're back home on just little trips, or if they happen to be in a certain area and we're traveling there, we'll always like meet up with them. And that's something that people just don't really recognize about the travel community if you're not a traveler, and so you just kind of hit the nail on the head with that. And it just resonates with me when I hear it.
And Jamal, you're never too old to backpack. I was meeting people who I would backpack, and I'm like, you're as old as my grandparents, and they're staying in dorms. But there are places that, honestly, hostels were just better than the hotels. In Australia specifically, the hotel prices are just so outrageously expensive that they have rooms for families to book for hostels. So they can book in for a family vacation. And especially in Central America, it's really popular with people who are in their 30s, their 40s, who are backpacking, because you can also book private rooms, which are still half the price of a night in a hotel. Now, hostels in Southeast Asia are a different story. That's much more of a 18, 19, 20-year-old backpack. There were hostels that I stayed in, and I was like, you guys party too hard for me. And I was in a fraternity, like, good luck. But yeah, I think hostels are a great way. And whenever I say to people that I stayed in hostels, the first thing that came to their mind was the horror movie. And they're like, you're not afraid of getting murdered or anything? Honestly, no. I felt pretty safe. I had a lock on all of my stuff. I didn't take anything valuable with me to begin with, other than my laptop and my camera. So I wasn't really that worried of getting robbed. And if I did, I had insurance on it. But hostels are a great way to meet people, because oftentimes they'll have free activities for everyone staying. So the amount of hostels that I would stay in, they'd be like, great, free drinks tonight at 6, bring this plastic card, and just show it to your bartender. So we would go, and they would take the card, and we would just get free shots, and then we would all hang out together as a hostel. There was one up in Cairns that did a ladies' night, where they had male dancers that were shirtless walking around giving champagne to all the women, but all the men had to pay for all the drinks. So they just have that. That one is Gilligan's Backpackers. If you stay there, you might want to bring some extra pair of sheets. It's not the classiest place, but it is one of the big, like, iconic hostels in Australia that people stay at. So I recommend, if you go up there, 1 night, 2 nights, get the drinking out of your system, go stay at a nicer hotel when you actually want to go snorkel on the Great Barrier Reef. Do not do it hungover. It's a terrible idea.
Well, so you talked a little bit about being in Panama, and then I know your next part of your trip was to Australia, which you were just kind of diving into, and you talked about a little bit before. So other than the work holiday that you did there, what other traveling did you do while you were in Australia?
So I started in Melbourne, on a group tour called Welcome to Travel. And this company specifically does tours for people coming to Australia on a working visa. So on that tour, they set me up with my Australian SIM card. They set me up with my tax file number. They helped me open my Australian bank account. So that was an incredible plus and advantage and resource to have. So I was in Melbourne and I actually got COVID. So I had to go do a week isolation in the government isolation hub, but it was all free because I was a foreigner. I didn't have anywhere else to stay. I couldn't stay in a hotel. So after that, I flew up to Sydney. I was there for a week, and then I flew up to the north and made my way down. And then after that, that's when I went and did my ski work. After I finished that ski work, I flew to Alice Springs in the Outback. So I got to see Uluru because that was like the one big thing I really wanted to see in Australia before I had left. And then after that, I took a 22-hour bus ride up to Darwin, that's where I flew from Darwin to Indonesia to start my 4 months through Southeast Asia.
It sounds like a lot in Australia. I haven't been there yet, and I really commend you because, quite honestly, Australia just scares me. I feel like all the things that can kill you in Australia, and of course I'm going to go, but to live there and be around that for a long time, I commend you for that because I would constantly think, is this spider in my bed? Is this snake under my bed? Yeah, the farm workers that you were talking about earlier, potentially on the visas, I can't even imagine what they're coming across out in the fields out there sometimes in terms of what can kill you. So, wow, in Australia.
Thankfully, I don't have too many encounters with deadly animals. I do have one close encounter, and I was up on Magnetic Island, which is up far in the north, and it's one of the islands that has the highest percentage of koala population in the world. So I went up there and I did a day hike, walked around, and then I ended up at a beach, and it was a clothing optional beach. It was not an official clothing optional beach, but I was sitting on a rock and I just looked down to my side, and maybe 2 feet from me was like this little snake. It was curled up, and I was like, I bet that thing could kill me. And there was a guy about 20 feet away. I was like, hey, there's a snake over here. And he goes, well, is it gray with dark stripes on it? He goes, yeah. He said, well, that's a death adder. It'll kill you. I don't think I've ever ran faster in my life. Thankfully, that was the only deadly animal encounter I had. But the rule of thumb is just in Northern Australia, stay out of the water. Honestly, the spiders are scary. The snakes are scary. It's the crocodiles that are the worst. So just stay out of the water and don't go out in the bush and you'll be fine.
Well, I know we talked a little bit so far, of course, of your South America or Latin America, obviously Australia. You mentioned how you flew from Darwin to Indonesia. So talk to us a little bit about your Asia adventures.
Yeah, so I started in Indonesia. I started in Bali. I went there for my birthday. I celebrated turning 25 in Bali. It was great. And
Question. We're considering going to Bali next year. What's your honest opinion of it?
Okay. So Bali is a very chaotic place. If you react to strong smells, you will not have a fun time in the city parts of Bali. But Ubud, which is in the middle, 10 out of 10. It was absolutely incredible. That one was very much yoga retreat kind of vibes, lots of rice paddy fields. And while I was there, I did a day tour and we went to the Ubud Water Temple, which is a very big tourist site, but it's also a very holy pilgrimage site as well. And what you can do is you can put on the traditional clothes and you can take a cleansing bath. And what you do is you go and you put your hand under your water 3 times, then you wash your face, and then you drink out of your left hand, and then you wash your hair, and then you get in line. You do that 6 or 7 times. And we were there with other tourists, but we were there with these families of all these local people. And our tour guide said he comes there once a year with his family, and it's to cleanse yourself and to spiritually wash away the sins and the dirt. So I was like, yeah, it's a very refreshing experience, but it was absolutely incredible. Ubud, when you go to Bali, highly, highly recommend you have to do that. It's in the middle. Spend a few days there. They have the fire dance, traditional dances that they do every night at the palace, which was really cool. So I loved Bali. And then if you take a ferry over to the next island, which is Gili T, There are no cars on the island. It's only horses and bikes, and the entire island is basically sand, but it's a big party island. And the island that's right next to it is the same thing, but it's not party. It's more chill, more Airbnb, more resorts. So definitely the Gili Islands. They're just a short 45-minute ferry boat across. Highly recommend it, just for a few days at least. But be very careful of getting Bali belly. I did, so just make sure you have some antibiotics to get rid of anything your system's not ready for.
That sounds amazing. And I think when Kim asked, we were talking about going to Bali next year, and I could see the smile on her face that we're probably going to make this a trip, and she's probably going to want to hit up one of the Gili Islands, probably the party island for sure. But where else did you go in Southeast Asia during the section of your trip?
So after my birthday in Indonesia, I flew up to Singapore, and I met up with a friend who I met. He actually worked at the ski shop with me. He showed me around Singapore. I was there for about 4 or 5 days, and then I took a bus up into Kuala Lumpur, where I spent a few days, and then I flew up to Thailand, where I spent 3 weeks starting from the south, and I made my way up all the way to the north. And then I was going to go into Laos, but my dad texted me, and this was right before Christmas at the time, and he said, if I pay for your plane ticket home, will you come home and surprise your mom for Christmas? And I said, of course, it's a free plane ticket. Why not? So I flew 55 hours home, surprised my mom for Christmas, and then right after New Year's, I flew back to Asia. I flew into Vietnam. I flew into Hanoi. And then I spent a month going down Vietnam, and then I went over into Cambodia, where I was for 3 months. Then I crossed back over into Bangkok, where I then flew to Dubai. So that was my section in Southeast Asia. So it totaled about 4 months from start to finish.
And what was your favorite part about that part of the trip?
It was just a absolute culture shock, unlike anything I experienced before, and I loved every second of it. Since I've been a kid, I've always loved like Asian cultures. I love whenever history or geography teacher said pick a project to do a country on, I was always like China, Japan. That was what I loved, and I found it so fascinating. So just being there and being in it was incredible. Vietnam was one of my favorite countries that I traveled to. It was one of the most beautiful places in the world. The people were so friendly, so nice. It was so incredibly cheap. I would eat out, drink out, and with like transportation, shopping, all of that, and my hostel, it would be about $30-$40 a day. So it's an incredible place to travel to if you want to travel for long-term on a budget. And the people of Southeast Asia were just so incredibly friendly. And the food, of course, the food. Gotta love the food.
You can never go wrong with the food, especially in certain countries. You know, you're always going to get a really, really good cuisine. And so when you were done in Asia, you said you flew to Dubai. Now, was that the only area in the Mideast that you went to, or did you go anywhere else in the region?
So with that company, G Adventures, I did an 8-day tour in Jordan. So what I did was when I flew from Thailand, I was really flying from Thailand to Jordan with a layover in Dubai for 4 or 5 days. So I just extended that, saw the sights. I went to the Atlantis Palm Jumeirah, did the Leap of Faith water slide from The Amazing Race, all that stuff. I did chicken out at the one where you like step into the coffin and the floor just drops out beneath you. That one, that was a no for me.
Well, we participate. I don't mean to interrupt you. We participated in those ones when we were staying out in Dubai as well. And I remember, I love The Amazing Race, but I could not remember if they did that water slide scene in Dubai or if they did it at the Atlantis in the Bahamas.
It was in Dubai.
Ooh, I feel even better now that we did it.
Yeah. So I'm part of an Amazing Race Facebook group. So I took a picture of the slide and I put it in, and I got hundreds of likes and from like previous racers, and they're like, we've done that. So I was like, yay, my connection.
I want to say that when we were at that water park, we had a great time at the water park, by the way. So there was actually 4 of us that went, but the coffin one that you're talking about where you step in and the bottom drops out, Jamal did that one by himself, and I would convince Jamal's sister to race me down it. And so we were both supposed to get in at the same time, and then they were going to drop us and we were going to race. And as I was already loaded in, and she was supposed to load in after me, and she chickened out So then I had to race myself down instead by myself, and she did the walk of shame down the stairs.
I see. What was funny is no one was in the line for it, and I get up to it, and the guy's like, "Yeah, you can go in," and he opens it, and I literally look in. I step halfway, and I just start freaking out. And I'm not claustrophobic, and I'm not afraid of heights, but something about it was just freaking me out. So I was standing in the line for the other slide next to it, and the guy, like, people would come up, they would get in, he'd be like, "All right, 3, 2," and then they would drop on 2, and I was like, no. And there were big muscly guys behind me, and they also chickened out of doing that one. I was like, all right, I don't feel as bad now. But yeah, so after I did Dubai, I did 8 days in Jordan. So we did Amman, and we made our way down through Petra and Wadi Rum, all the way down to Aqaba, and then we went back up to Amman, where I then flew from Amman to Vienna, Austria. And I was going to do a few months in Europe, and I just hit a point in my bank account where I told myself, I'm at that point, time to go home. So I only spent about a week in Europe, and I did Austria and Prague. So I did those 2 countries before going home. So I hit 4 continents on my trip.
So unfortunately, you probably hit the most expensive places at the very end when they're sitting there, on the euro at that point in time too. So
yeah.
And I guess that kind of brings up a point to another question that I have that I'm sure I know the answer to. But of course, I imagine all of this was funded from your savings that you talked about earlier, minus what you were working for in Australia, because I can't imagine you worked anywhere else on this journey. Just had the visa in Australia to work legally and then made money there, and plus with your savings.
Yeah, so I paid for this trip with 4 kind of big chunks of money. The first one was my savings from living here and working for a year. My second one was also when I lived and worked in Australia. But I also, before I left, sold my car. So I got $7,000 off of my car. So that was a big chunk. And then I also was fortunate to get a really juicy tax return last year. So all in all, total, this whole 14 months around the world cost me just north of about $20,000, which for a trip, that sounds like a lot of money. But then when you look at the cost of how much it costs to live in the US for a year, you're like, wow, it is not a lot. It's just that first step of having that money to get out there first.
Well, in some places, $20,000 won't even get you a year's worth of rent, right? So you had places to stay, food, your transportation, activities, everything that you did. So you're right. In the grand scheme of things, that is not very much. But to your point, you are correct. You just kind of need that initial boost to kind of get you there to get started, which I know is hard for a lot of people, but making it work on not that much money to compare to, like you said, rent prices or mortgages even in the US.
Yeah, absolutely. And it also helped to just actually I tracked every penny that I spent, with the exception of the ATM withdrawal fees. Those were the only ones I didn't really count. And there was this really cool app that a guy showed me when I was in the outback of Australia called Travel Spend. And I highly recommend it to all travelers. And what it is you put on your trip that you're going to put in. So if you're going to go to Bali next year, you're going to say, all right, we're going to go to Bali for 10 days, and our budget for the trip is $3,000. So then what the app does is it tells you how much you can spend every day. And then as you put in how much you're spending, it tracks if you're going over budget, under budget, and then it adjusts your remaining days' budgets as well. So if you're under budget for 3 days, your daily budget may go up from $50 to $75. But if you overspend, that will drop down. So it's a great way to track those budgets. And you literally just type in how much you spent, and it will track your location. So it says, oh, you're in Japan, we're automatically going to put it in as yen. So that way you can track, that way you don't have to worry about tracking the currency conversion. It automatically does that for you in the app.
Budget was one of my biggest questions because I've really been daydreaming a lot lately about taking a year to travel myself. And I've just been starting to think, how much do you actually need? And it's possible. I know it's possible. But so you said 20,000. Were there any days where you felt like I need to conserve money, or you stayed in hostels, or were there any other decisions that you made for the financial reasons? You took some tours, so I imagine
Oh yeah, absolutely. A lot of my decision making was based on how much money can I spend left for this day. And sometimes it was like, I have to make sacrifices. I can't go do this one thing that my friends are going because it would put me way over budget. And then there were some days where I treated myself. I was in Brisbane and, my hostel wasn't particularly social. You just find some of them like that. And I said, you know what? I haven't been going out and doing things with people. I'm going to treat myself. So I bought myself a ticket to see 9 to 5, the musical. And I went and I saw the musical. I treated myself to a nice Italian dinner. I got myself some drinks, bought myself some souvenirs. So there were days where I definitely really went over my budget. And there were some days where my only cost was an energy drink and lunch. So it was really finding that balancing act. But yeah, I did have to make some sacrifices saying, that's too expensive, or I can't get that one thing I want to get because it costs too much. So I did have to make lots of sacrifices on some of those daily cost things.
Hey, not unlike regular life, right?
Yeah. I mean, I wish I could go see 9 to 5, the musical every day, but I can't.
You can always pop in the old DVD and watch Dolly Parton and,
I could.
put you there, kind of.
I think I have it on Amazon Prime.
Yeah.
What were some of the other things along the trip that you consciously chose to do to save money, like hikes versus paid experiences or other ways you saved money along the way?
Yeah, so one thing that I like to do is I like to do free walking tours. Those are always a great option because if you're not liking it, you can always just kind of dip off to the side a little bit. And I actually did that in Austria because it was just so cold. I was like, screw this, I'm going to go get food and go back to my hostel. But yeah, so I definitely tried doing free walking tours. If there was something I wanted to do, I tried finding a cheaper alternative. And then where it was possible, I would buy groceries and just cook for myself. I took a travel Tupperware container and a travel like set of cutlery. So that way I could cook myself a big pasta in the hostel kitchen and have that for 3 days. That means 3 dinners I don't have to go out. That saved me 60, 70, 80 bucks right there. So those were definitely things that I chose to do. And also my biggest expense, it's always alcohol and food. So definitely just picking and choosing when to go out and drink, or when is it cheaper to go to a store and bring a bottle of rum back to the hostel and everyone gets to drink for cheap kind of thing. So definitely having to pick and choose when to go out and celebrate. When it came to tours and activities and stuff, I put that as a priority. So I would say, I would rather go to the Great Barrier Reef than go on a 3-day bender.
Mm-hmm.
Makes a lot of sense on that end of things. And one thing that I'm just wondering, of course, you're talking about this as a backpacking trip, but I have to ask the question, did you have a check luggage or was really everything in a backpack?
It was all in a backpack for me. I swear by carry-on only. It saved my life, and not only did it save my life, but it saved my wallet too. And I was able to get it all down into just 2, or I think at the most I had 3 backpacks at one point. My big backpack, and then I had my backpack that had my camera and my laptop in it, with also like my medicines. And then I had my day bag that had my journal, my jacket, snacks and stuff. But the backpack I have is an Osprey backpack, and it specifically is one where the day bag attaches to the backpack. So I would go from 2 bags to 1 in a matter of 30 seconds.
If you got the Osprey, you're already ready to go for the amazing race. I can tell you that.
Oh yeah, I am ready to go, Jamal. Just let me know when you want to film an audition.
Well, I know I can speak for all of us when I say we're completely envious of this journey that you had, and beyond journey, just a complete life experience. But of all the places that you went on this 14-month-and-a-half adventure, what was your favorite place overall that you went to? And what was the most underrated place? Doesn't necessarily have to be the same, or it can be, but I'm just genuinely curious about that.
I cannot narrow it down to just like one particular. I can't even narrow it down to one country that I loved more than any of the other ones, but my top 3 favorite countries that I went to were Guatemala, Vietnam, and Jordan. And the 3 moments that I fell in love with those countries, I'll give you those ones. Those are the closest that I can give you to answer your question. When I was in Guatemala, there's a volcano you can hike called Volcan Acatenango, and it's just outside of Antigua, and it's a 5-hour hike from the base to from the start to base camp, and it is basically a 45-degree angle, and it's all volcanic sand. So 2 steps forward, half a step back kind of thing. And it was the most physically demanding thing I've ever done in my life. But we got to base camp, and you're above the clouds, you're above the trees, and you just are, so you look around and it's just clouds beneath you and then just volcanoes popping up from in between. And you are about 2 miles from the next volcano peak, and it actively erupts about every 15 minutes. So as we're sitting there, we just see like these ash clouds coming up, but as the sun starts setting, those ash clouds start turning red and orange. So there are these beautiful eruptions, and it was so cool because before I left to save up my money, I worked as an elementary school teacher. And when I told the kids I was leaving, they were all really bummed. So I told them that I would film videos as I traveled around the world and I'd send them back. So one of the videos I did was I took the kids up this volcano and I taught them about plate tectonics and earthquakes and all that stuff. And as I was teaching the kids this, other people on my hiking tour were like, teach us about this. We'd never paid attention in high school. Tell us. So I was teaching not only my kids, but these backpackers who are on this hike with me. And it was absolutely incredible. But the worst part of the hike, and also the best part, is they wake you up at 4 a.m. to summit. So you hike up to the summit. It's dark. You're there in your pajamas. You're hating everything because it's freezing cold. But you get to the summit, and you can see the Caribbean Ocean on one side, the Pacific Ocean on the other, and the sun is coming up over Guatemala as these volcanoes around you are erupting. And that was one of the most life-changing moments because I got to see the earth physically change in front of me. So that's why I fell in love with Guatemala. With Vietnam, it was Ha Long Bay, which is up in the north, which it's thousands of islands that are just jetting out of the ocean. They look like scales coming out. And I did an overnight cruise that a lot of backpackers do. You just stay on the boat. But I did it for 2 nights, and we went around Ha Long Bay. And it was, even though it was misty and rainy, it was still one of the most incredible moments because I woke up before everyone else. I woke up at like 6 a.m. and I walked up on the deck with my camera, and I just took pictures because it was glass still, except for one fishing boat that was slowly making its way across. And it had the Vietnamese flag in the sails, so I got these pictures, and it was just calm and serene. And one of my friends, she's from Vietnam, and she was telling me about this before I went, and she said, when I think of my happy place, like if I'm stressed or customers yelling at me, and I go to my happy place, that's where she goes. And I was there, and I texted her, I said, I get it. You're right. It makes perfect sense to me. And so that's why I fell in love with Vietnam, because that was just the start to a very beautiful country. And then in Jordan, it's absolutely incredible going to Petra. We went at sunrise, and we were the first people there. And our tour guide messed with us, and he was like, you can hear the aqueducts underground. So like look down, you can see some of the sand moving on top. So we're like looking, we're like, we can't see the sand moving. We can't see the sand moving. Oh well. Anyway, we're at Petra, and we look up, and it's right in front of us. We're like, and he just laughed at us the whole time. It was just such an incredible experience. As a gay man, I've always been afraid to go to the Middle East, but Jordan was just such an accepting and friendly and safe place. And that, I think that's one of the reasons that I fell in love with it, because I had such different expectations that it really flipped my worldview of this country and a region that, as Americans growing up post 9/11, was something that I was very scared of going to. My parents were afraid of me going, and it really just changed my opinion on a lot of what I was expecting.
Jordan is another one of the countries that I need to visit in the next 3 years, like on the top of my list.
Oh, absolutely.
Did you go with a tour, or did you go solo?
So I went with the tour. It was with that company, G Adventures. It was 8 days, and we hit all of the highlights of Jordan. And so G Adventures offers a wide variety of tours. They offer tours that are specifically designated towards outdoors and activity people. There are tours that are meant just for food, and then there are tours that are meant, there's a bunch of tours that they have that's called 18 to 30 somethings, and it's for anyone under the age of 39 and younger, and they're offered at discounted rates. So my Central America tour, I think, was $1,400, and that covered almost everything. The Jordanian tour was one of their classic tours, and that one was just about $1,000 because it was on sale. But that one, we had people who were upwards of their 80s on that tour with us. And I was one of the youngest people. So you just meet incredible people on these tours from all walks of life, all different ages. Highly, highly recommend the company G Adventures, along with Gate 1.
How did you pick the countries? Because I'm hearing about Jordan and then Egypt's right there. I would want to go to Egypt. And then you were in South America and I would want to go to Colombia. And like, there were obviously some that you had to skip. How did you go about picking them?
Well, it was kind of just a fly by the seat of my pants decision. My goal in life is to visit every country. So I always like had that in the back of my mind. Well, I'll always go back and visit it if I don't get to it. Mm-hmm. Egypt was one that I really wanted to travel to, but it's one that I know I want to travel to on a tour.
Yeah.
It's also one that I know that my brother and sister-in-law want to travel to. So we kind of agreed that maybe we'd do that as a sibling and significant other tour in 5 to 10 years. So I tried picking tours on not only where I wanted to go, but also where does my family want to go with me. So I also thought about perspective like that, because I really wanted to go to Japan, but my dad is very set on us going to Japan after he retires because he climbed Mount Fuji when he was in the Navy. But unfortunately, our apartment flooded and it ruined his Mount Fuji stick. So as you climb, you get a walking stick that they'll burn kanji into at every station along the way up the mountain. So he wants to go back and get another one of those, but with my brother and I this time. So I told him I'll wait to go to Japan until he goes. So, yeah.
I love that. And I love that how you broke down every place that was your favorite. Guatemala's been on my list for a little while, and doing that volcano hike. Once you said that, I was like, yes, I am frantically adding this to my bucket list right now. Jordan's been on my list as well to see Petra. So I love how you broke it down and gave us like really great examples of all of the moments that made you fall in love with that specific country. Was there any country that you visited that you felt was overrated?
Or city?
I was not a fan of Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. And I know a lot of people who are like, Malaysia, it's beautiful, but they're talking a lot about Borneo side and the countryside in Georgetown. I was not impressed with Kuala Lumpur. I just personally didn't like it. I thought it was dirty and crowded and how I thought Bangkok was going to be, but I was surprised at how nice Bangkok was actually. So I definitely say Kuala Lumpur. And Dubai. Dubai felt like a Middle Eastern Vegas, just without the fun. And it was funny because I actually stayed in a hostel in Dubai, which I was surprised they even existed. But the hostel balcony view was looking at Caesar's Palace in Dubai. So I was like, I'm in Vegas. There's Caesar's Palace. There's a Ferris wheel that's lighting up at night. Great.
That's exactly how we equated Dubai too. I loved our time there. It's worth a visit just for people to check it out. But honestly, I can't imagine spending any more than, 2 days there top to just kind of really see it. Unless you are that person that has all that money and want to live in that opulence, then great. But just like as a visitor, Dubai, not hating on it, but agree with you wholeheartedly.
I've told all of my friends and family that if you want to go to Dubai, do it as a layover if you're going somewhere else in that part of the world. Like if you're going to India or Africa, do a 2-3 day layover in Dubai, because Emirates Airlines, if you call them, they'll just extend your layover for free.
I saw that.
Yeah. So that's how I recommend it to people, because it's not a vacation destination.
When you were in Thailand, did you go to the full moon party?
I did not. I missed the full moon party. I was not there at the right time of the month. It just worked out that I was basically going to be there on the new moon. And so those parties happened on Koh Phangan. I was on Koh Samui and I was going to go up to Koh Phangan. I had such a terrible time on Koh Samui that I just said, screw this. I'm going up to Bangkok early. And it was a combination of a few things. It wasn't the island's fault. It was a combination of, one, I was recovering from my Bali belly, so I was a little on the edgier side with my stomach. The hostel I stayed in was a bunch of 19-year-old British backpackers that all they would do is drink and they would not talk to me. And it poured rain the whole time. So I would love to give some of the Thai islands a second chance, especially on that eastern side. I enjoyed the Thai islands on the western side, Koh Phi Phi, Koh Lanta. I loved Koh Lanta. I went and I sat in a beachside bungalow for 4 or 5 hours. They just kept bringing me beers. My bill at the end was $9.
Oh, yeah.
So that's one thing that I loved about Thailand. When I was in Koh Phi Phi, I went to the tourist boxing matches. Have you heard of these?
Yes, I went to it.
Oh my gosh. I took a video of it and I had to explain to my parents that these people were beating the crap out of each other for a $5 bucket of alcohol.
You didn't get in there?
No, I would just pay the $5 to watch them beat each other up. So I had people who were like, "What, you're not doing it?" I was like, "No," but I also knew people who totally would do it. But yeah, I liked the Western Islands. I want to get back to the Eastern side, but I was there in rainy season, so they were a little monsoonal while I was there.
Yeah, there's just so much to see and do over there that I really want to go back to. I love Thailand. That's my favorite country that I've been to.
I want to go back to get my scuba certification out in Koh Tao because apparently the fish schools just circle around you, and it's one of the most beautiful places in the world to get your scuba. So I want to go back to do that.
Well, I feel that's kind of like a perfect transition because you're talking about what you want to do and what's next. And so I'm genuinely curious, how was transition back to life? Like, not that that's not real life, but you know what I mean? Coming back to the U.S. And then from here, where do you go in terms of your travels? Are you saving up for another big adventure like this? Or are you taking little smaller ones?
So, transitioning back was interesting. Moved back in with my parents, and I've just been getting my feet back underneath me. I actually start a new job in about a week and a half with a company called EF Education First. And what my job is going to be working one-on-one with middle schools and high schools to help those schools set up international overnight field trips. So the company that I went to Costa Rica with is now the company that I work for. Yeah, so that I definitely brought that up in my interview. They're like, "Yeah, you're an alumni." So that's my new job, and I'll get to travel with that work as well. So I'll be going to Europe sometime next spring or summer. I'm not sure when or where, but they do send me on tour with the schools every so often. So I'm saving up to do another backpacking trip to Europe, especially because this last one got cut short. So I'm going to finish up my Europe part of my round the world trip next year. So that's my next trip, big trip coming up. But I also have a few trips planned throughout the U.S. through the fall. I'm going to Seattle in September. And then my family and I were going to Maui for Thanksgiving this year.
Oh, that's Jamal's favorite place.
You know me, Kim. You know me. No, I love that. Have you been to Maui before, Gavin?
I've not been to Hawaii before.
So you're gonna love it. The girls rag on me because when we did our Maui episode, they were like, Jamal's coming off like he's hating, and I'm not hating, but for how much people talk about, I love Maui. Maui's great, and I want to reiterate this to defend myself. You've been to Kauai. I loved it a lot more, and that was my first island. So that's why Kim says that. But if you haven't been to Hawaii, you're gonna love it.
Well, Gavin, I think you're going to have a problem because you've been so many amazing, beautiful places in the world that sometimes U.S. places don't really match up when you've seen the amazing stuff out there.
I have to disagree. I think the U.S. has some of the best natural beauty in the world, and
you do.
I live out here in Colorado. I got the Rocky Mountains literally just to the west. That's how we determine what direction we're driving out here. But yeah, no, coming from this trip around the world, people are like, well, you don't want to travel the U.S. anymore. I'm like, no, since I've traveled around so much, I've realized how little of the U.S. that I've traveled to, and I've still been to 20 plus states. So I definitely have more trips. I actually just got back from Chicago a couple of weeks ago. I had never been to Chicago, had very low expectations for it, but my boyfriend's out there and he's like, come out for Pride weekend. I said, yeah, sure. And it was one of my favorite cities that I've been to in the U.S. It was absolutely incredible. When I was there, we did the Ghosts and Gangsters walking tour. Oh my gosh, I loved it. It was so cool. And people make fun of me for liking ghost tours, but in reality, they're just history tours. So that's, I think, a great way to get into seeing cities is to do a history tour, do a ghost tour.
Yeah, we did a ghost tour while we were in Savannah, and it just did have so much history. They brought you to all of the historical squares. You learn about historical events, and it just gave us, like, doing the walking tour just gives you just such a great layout of a city, so that when you go and explore it by yourself, you're like, oh, I kind of have the lay of the land on top of some of the history. So if you haven't been to Savannah, it was another city where we've heard a lot about it. I kind of had low expectations, and it completely blew me out of the water. 100% go back again. And I would completely agree with you that the U.S. is one of the most beautiful places, and there's so many different states with different geological landscapes and so much diverse beauty in the U.S. that we're trying to hit all 50 states. We're also trying to hit all of the countries. I told Jamal the other day, I said, if we do 5 countries a year, we will hit all 195 in 33 years. And so he was like, oh my God, you're ridiculous. But
I think that sounds attainable.
right. Yeah. I was like, I can break this down by year.
Yeah.
I
mean,
A trip like Gavin did.
I did 19 in 14 months. I think 5 a year is very much a great goal, Brittany.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Well, Gavin, as we wrap up this interview, is there anything else that you want to tell our listeners about your trip or anything in general?
I would have to say just any experience that you can traveling, get that experience, whether it's a weekend away in your home state or a family vacation for a week to a new country or 14-month trip around the world. Just getting out there and experiencing life is a way to not only learn about yourself, but learn about everyone else who calls this planet home. There's 8 billion of us, might as well make some connections, right?
Absolutely. This has been a great conversation. So interesting. I definitely want to see a lot of these pictures and videos that you were mentioning. And it was just really, really great talking to you. And I can't wait to see where you're going to go next.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'll make sure I get those pictures sent over to you. Yeah. And I'm keeping listening to the podcast. You got a subscriber. So yeah.
Excellent. And just let our listeners know real quick where they can find you on Instagram or any other social media.
Yeah, if you want to follow me on Instagram, my Instagram handle is @gavman_97. So that's how you can get a hold of me. And, I had a great time here conversing with you guys. And when Travel Squad launches group tours, send me an email. I'll be one of the first ones to sign up.
We will.
Email Gavin.
Yeah, Gavin, you're an honorary Squadie for life from now on.
Fuck yeah.
Love it.
Thank you so much, Gavin.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Squaddies, for tuning into our episode this week with Gavin. Keep the adventures going with us by following us on Instagram and YouTube at Travel Squad Podcast, and send us in your questions of the week.
If you found the information in this episode to be useful, or if you thought we were just plain funny, please be sure to share with a friend that would enjoy it too. And as always, please subscribe, rate, and review our podcast, and tune in every Travel Tuesday for new episodes.
Stay tuned for next week's episode. We have some more amazing adventures and tips in store for you.
Bye, Squaddies.
Bye.